Good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us on our technical challenges here. We are coming live from the Kansas leadership this morning for a special live stream presentation. So I'm Maren Berblinger, Journal Engagement Manager here at the Leadership Center. The Journal is in the middle of our second end-of-year fundraising campaign through a program called Newsmatch, and this is enabling us to have donations go further during the months of November and December this year through national and local matching funds. So you probably have already heard that Giving News Day or Giving Tuesday is a big thing in the nonprofit realm, and we're deciding to have a little bit of fun with it this year. So we're calling it Giving News Day, and we're having two special segments who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. But the first is that we're going to have a reunion of past and present editors of the Journal. And then we're also going to get to hear from Chief Photographer Jeff Tuttle about the countless images that he's captured throughout the state of Kansas over the last decade. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to a distinguished group of people that have agreed to be on with us on this live stream today. And so let's just go around the virtual room here, and we'll create some space to introduce everyone, past and present editors of the Journal. Mark, how about you kick us off?
Sure. My name is Mark McCormick. I'm a recovering journalist in a sense. My daily journalism career ended in the early 2000s, but when I say recovering, it just means that you never quite get it out of your system. And I think Marty understands that as well. I led the transition of the Journal from largely an academic kind of publication to one where the outreach and engagement was supposed to be much more targeted. I'm now the Deputy Executive Director of the ACLU of Kansas.
Terrific. And Ed, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Maren. Ed O'Malley, currently President and CEO of the Kansas Health Foundation, formerly the President and CEO of the Kansas Leadership Center. And I think I've always been a wannabe journalist. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we ended up creating the thing that we now call the Journal. And it's great to be back with you, Mark. And it will be fun to reminisce about those days. And that transition you just briefly mentioned was such a critical, pivotal moment that I bet we can get into a little bit later. And Maren, Chris, and always good, Marty, to be with you. So great to be with everybody. Thanks for having me.
That's terrific. And Marty, let's hear from you.
Well, I'm representing all non-Kansans on the face of the earth today, and some of whom are undoubtedly Journal readers, but not probably as many as there are in Kansas. And my relationship to the Journal is like my relationship to this conversation. It's really as an outsider. I have my byline has appeared a few times. I've spent a certain amount of time kibitzing with Chris and Ed over the years, and on those days when I had the energy to read the Journal, there was Mark on the back page reminding me of our shared history as lapsed journalists. So I'm really interested in this conversation today, and particularly in putting it in the context of what's going on in the world, not only what's going on in the world around journalism, but what's going on in the world around the kinds of issues that KLC and the Journal embody and represent. So let's get with it.
That's terrific. Thank you, Marty. And Chris?
And I'm Chris Green. I'm the current executive editor of the Journal, and I was looking back before we started this and realized that I have written or contributed to every edition of the Journal but the very first one in some manner. And so it's kind of interesting to have that seat for its evolution. And one of the cool things I think about the Journal is that it never stays stuck in place, and it continues to move and evolve, but I don't think it's ever really lost the spirit of that first issue. And there's like sort of an audacity and a like a pursuit of the common good just sort of like echoes through the years. So it's really interesting to see what stays the same and what changes over time.
That's terrific. And Carlota Pons, I want to give a shout out to her. She's not able to join us today on this call, but she was also an early editor of the journal and sends her best wishes to the team. So let's just dig in here to this conversation. My first question I have for you all is, what was your favorite or maybe the most impactful thing that you were involved with when it comes to your connection or work with the journal? And Chris, I might pass this to you first.
Okay. So I think a really huge pivot point occurred in 2018 when the journal published its story about the challenges facing Kansas water. And it was kind of our first real instance of doing investigative reporting, like we, used public records. But we also told a story that I think really shifted the narrative in Kansas about the preservation of the Ogallala Aquifer. And you still see stories today in the New York Times and from the Kansas City Star and stuff. But I don't think I've seen anything before or since that has made that issue as clear and as understandable as possible, and also really showed like the routes to leadership that would have to be passed by Kansans in order to make progress. And so I just think like that was we've had a lot of pivot points, but that one is just huge, and it led to such amazing things as the journal being celebrated at the National Press Club with Society of Professional Journalists Award for public service. And that was just a moment that I think really changed what the journal would be and what it could become.
I'll be happy to hop in. I think what's on my mind is just the beginning. And I don't think I played a big role as the years went by, but I think at the beginning, and the origin story of the journal is really intriguing. It's not, we did not create it to be what it is today. To your point, Chris, it has always evolved, and it's always evolved in a really great direction. But I think back to the beginning, and we had this nutty idea of creating some kind of publication, and we just had an instinct that it would be valuable. It was really expensive to produce, and we were a fledgling little organization, but it meant something to have something that looked really good. I think it took really until Carlota and Mark came along for the content to begin to match how good the magazine looked. Claire, our early designer, always made us look better than we were. But I think just those early days of saying, yeah, we should have a quarterly publication that is highly professional, that we print lots of copies of and we put out in the world, that's going to matter. That's going to be important. And who knows exactly how or why, but let's do it. And we were off and running. And I'm so glad it's evolved. But I think back to those early editions and think, what a nutty idea.
I don't mind jumping in now. I had three things in mind. The first, you mentioned Jeff. I brought Jeff on. And one of the things that I think lifts the journal is some of the best photography you're going to see anywhere in the country. And I just felt like the staff that we had at the Eagle, where we got Jeff, and I think Fernando shoots from time to time as well. Photography was really my first love. I didn't even really want to be a writer. I wanted to be a photographer. I had Gordon Parks books in my house growing up, and I wanted to be Gordon. That was the first thing. The second was I really liked a story we did about the Mayflower Clinic, which was an effort on the part of doctors who were immigrants to give back to the society. They opened a free clinic for people who had just lost their jobs. And this was an idea that we want to communicate that immigrants just don't take. Immigrants give, and they make our communities better. And then lastly, I just remember the summer of the Ferguson uprisings and the piece that we did that featured two of my friends, Kevis Harding and Junius, and I just felt like we were on the cutting edge of the latest version of a civil rights movement in the country that spread out, and we were on the front end of that. And so those are the things that came to mind when I was thinking about the things that I enjoyed most.
I think it's for me is from a distance. It's been really fascinating to watch the relationship between KLC and the Journal. I remember early conversations in which we were thinking of a continuum between Chris and Mark's vision of creating a new, I don't know what the metaphor, a new New Yorker maybe or something.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other end of the continuum, a kind of a house organ for KLC, and trying to figure out what spot along that continuum would be useful, since the mantra has always been how can we be useful, how can we have an impact. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is as a reader of the journal, but not very much of a participant in it or directly affected by what is published, is to think about, and I'd be interested in how you, Chris, would describe this, that it feels to me that continuum is no longer viable. That is, that the journal has invented a new relationship to KLC and to its readers that doesn't lie along that kind of simple-minded range of possibilities that we envisioned in the early days.
Would you have any reflections on that continuum, Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to think and remember more about the continuum, but I think it's like it's always changing. And I think what the journal is somewhat trying to do now is live out the KLC ideas as much as possible in what we cover and in what conversations we spark among people, and to be sort of this this just unique vehicle for sparking discussions, that if we don't have these discussions, if we don't see these things happening, it's going to be really hard for the leadership that we need to have happen in our state occur. So it's this intervention into the system to try to create the conditions for the kind of dialogue where people can actually exercise leadership. It's hard to exercise leadership when people are sniping at each other, when people aren't dealing in facts, when people are, struggling to have empathy with different people's perspectives and points of view. And we can talk about that. And it's really important that we talk about that and educate people how to do it, but we also have to do it at the same time. So I think, I don't know where that fits on the continuum, but the journal as doer in living out the KLC ideas, with kind of journalism being the strategy with which we do that, and to make it credible, to reach more people, to have more impact, to have financial sustainability, all of those things are kind of at play.
Chris, I'm curious, Chris, one of the things that's changed in the world over the last 15 years is the increasing polarization and the intensity of the polarization politically, but also culturally and societally. And I'm wondering, as I hear you talk about the vision, how that plays itself out in terms of how you choose what to write, how you choose how to frame things, in a way that will not feed the polarization, but will somehow bridge the gaps.
So I think the easy thing to do in a publication or a news organization or anything that's trying to produce content is to talk to the people that already know you and love you and like you. And it's sort of like getting the hallelujahs from the choir. And the journal tries not to do that. I think our strategy is to always second guess ourselves. Are we missing an angle? Who's the voice that's not being represented? Can we help people see something that maybe they're not seeing. And I think it means, disappointing our audience sometimes. I remember the time I got the angriest response was when the Journal, all the way back in 2014, when the Journal printed a Q&A with Arthur Brooks, who at that time was the president and CEO of the American Enterprise Institute. And he outlined a conservative approach to addressing poverty. And I remember presenting that to our readers, with the idea that 45% of Kansans consider themselves conservative, and if the state was going to make progress on poverty, that we needed to understand that perspective and what it had to bring to the conversation. And there were some people who were very disappointed for having that viewpoint elevated and crystallized in the pages. And sometimes that's like the responsibility is disappointing people and trying to do it at a rate they can handle. But I think we've also made a decision that there are some people on the left or right who are really going to struggle with some of the things we do, and we still have to keep doing it anyway, because if we don't, then sort of that voice that's trying to bridge things is going to be diminished.
It's really helpful. I'm curious, Marty, the link you were making in your early introduction comments about what the Journal can do to contribute to the civic issues in the world. And I'm just curious, from all of your vantage points, what do you think is the best way that the Journal could contribute to making progress on some of those really big challenges?
It feels to me one of the ways the Journal has tried to do that, and there's no way really of measuring success, I think, but is to try to help people tolerate complexity and ambiguity in a time in which there's a lack of acceptance of that possibility. The push toward clarity, I mean, we can use as a current case in point all the conversation around the Israel-Gaza war. People want to know where you stand. They want you to take a position. They want you to be on our side or their side, or somebody's side. And you go to a doctor. You don't want a doctor to say there's a 50-50 chance you've got this. You want the doctor to say this is truth. And I think the Journal has tried hard to help people understand that their point of view is more complicated, that reality is more complicated than they would prefer.
I love that idea. I really do. It seems as though the reading public wants simple solutions to complex issues. And if those of us who are producing news aren't helping people to build up that ability to navigate nuance, then we're hurting our democracy in the process. We have to help people build that sense of tolerance for complexity, because our problems are complex and there aren't easy solutions. If we're doing our job, that's what we should be doing. I like that comment, Marty.
Yeah, I mean, what it makes me think about is just modeling the ideas that are taught at KLC. And I think, Marty, your comments about the relationship between the Journal and KLC is a really interesting conversation. And I think that continuum did just get dismantled, and it's a new relationship and a better one than we ever could have imagined. But I think at its heart, it's modeling what it looks like to deeply diagnose situations. And it's modeling what it looks like from a journalism perspective to work across factions. And it's modeling, you could go down the different competencies and the elements of each competency. And I think the Journal models those things well. And for those people who are hoping to exercise leadership in the public square, I think there's a lot they can learn explicitly and implicitly from the Journal. It doesn't mean the Journal's perfect. It doesn't mean there might not be more the Journal could do. And my guess is we'll get to talk about the gap here in a little while. But I think modeling the ideas is something that Carlota, Mark, Chris, all the editors have helped champion, and I think it's a really beautiful thing.
That's a great segue, Ed, to talk about the gap. And I'm curious, maybe what's surprising or concerned you the most about the journal over the years, or anything of that sort? When we talk about the gap, it's the in-between of the concerns and the aspirations. So yeah, let's start with what concerns.
What concerns us?
Mm-hmm. Maybe how has the journal let you down, or what do you think the journal has fallen short?
Chris, were you about to jump in?
Oh, as you want me to start? So I think like when you adopt like a system and like sort of like commit and put a stake in the ground and say, we're going to do journalism, you also adopt all of the challenges that system brings with it. And so when you look across journalism, like you see divisions around the acceptance of facts, you see the people who make the news having different backgrounds and different levels of education than a whole bunch of people who need the news or could receive the news. And so, you end up with the whole dynamic of coastal elites making the news for the whole country and that news not being trusted. And, Kansas is not on a coast and we're not elite, but the same dynamics of journalism being more left of center than the country as a whole, of lack of diversity. And that diversity cuts two ways. Like people of color are poorly represented in journalism. And the journal has made a lot of efforts to try and counteract that. And we still have not reached the aspiration that we have. And just the level of involvement of different ideologies in the practice of journalism, it still skews center and center left. And the journal struggles to avoid those challenges just as much as any outlet. And we work really hard to present a wide range of viewpoints. And I still think we have strides to make in building trust with people from the right side of the spectrum.
Well, I think it's a really interesting point, Chris, because inherent in the idea of news is a tension with the status quo. And that creates a structural bias towards center and center left politics and ideology. And, the fact that no houses burned in Wichita last night is not news. And no one would be interested in that, even though it's factual and it's accurate and it's interesting and it's formative, but it's not news. So trying to present a range of points of view without making it feel as if I'm going to the zoo to see the animals on the other side seems very complicated. And it goes back to your Arthur Brooks example of trying to display different points of view in the context of trying to close the gap between the current reality and people's aspirations.
I think where I would go with this is I actually think that the journal has done, I think, a really good job of trying to mitigate that natural bias, Chris, you talked about, as well as almost any journalistic enterprise I can think of. I'm not saying that bias isn't present, but I think very conscious choices have been made on big strategic questions and micro questions about the layout of an article and whose picture to feature in order to help mitigate some of those biases that you just talked about. I think the journal handles that pretty well. But the take I would make on this is I still think getting the content of the journal into the hands of more people, in front of the eyes of more people, to me is a massive gap. And it's an incredible, amazing publication. And I don't think it reaches the number of Kansans and beyond that we would love. And maybe especially Kansans who are right of center or very right of center. I think if they got into it, they might feel like, wow, this is really balanced. But I think them getting to it is a big challenge.
Well, I want to pick up on one thing you said, Mark, has been trying to get in, but balance is the mainstream journalism's way of compensating for bias. And I think one of the things that the Journal has done well is not default to balance, but default to in-depth. So instead of saying on the one hand, on the other hand, here's a joker on the left, here's a joker on the right, and giving a megaphone to the crazies in our community, the Journal has tried to go an inch wide and deeper as a way of saying everybody can find a place in this argument, but it's not going to be the loudest voices necessarily that you're going to hear.
Mm. That's good stuff, Marty. I I had two thoughts, and some of this is what Chris was talking a little bit about before. I think the challenge for the Journal is the challenge for American journalism, where the staffs that put out this information should more reflect how the population looks. And, you know, the Journal and the Leadership Center is in partnership with a group of Kansans who tend to be a little older. They tend to be white. They tend to be highly educated. That's not how Kansas looks. And until we get people, you know, on all the staffs, and I'm not just talking about the Journal, I'm talking about journalism itself. You know, one of the things we used to talk about is that we needed to make sure that everyone was at the table. And if you're not at the table, you're not going to gravitate to this information. As Ed was pointing out, people want to see reflections of themselves in media. And that's one of the places where I really would like to see us grow. I'd also like to see us be more critical and conflictual. And this is one of the ideas that I took from Marty. You know, one of the things that has surprised me over the years is how strong the bullpen is, the bullpen of writers. I can remember soliciting pieces and then having to do a great deal of editing. We have some folks now who write, and I wouldn't have had to do that kind of editing for them. And we can go into the kind of depth that Marty was talking about. But if we're not more conflictual, if we're not challenging certain standards that need to be challenged, then you have to question how aggressive and rigorous our journalism is.
I wanted to go back to one thing Mark said in the spirit of challenging Chris and the team. You know, this question that Maren raised about, you know, what's disappointing or where's the gap. You know, I think one of the ways of addressing the kinds of issues we've been talking about is through the use of pictures, and pictures without comment, so people can take their own stories out of the pictures, is one idea. The other thing I was thinking about, and I wonder if you've ever thought about the flexibility that comes by the use of fiction, and what thinking about. There's so much powerful fiction in the world these days. What would it look like to have a fiction issue, or have a piece of fiction in every issue, or have a piece of fiction that tied in with one of the themes of the articles, as just a way of creating different forms?
That's an interesting point. One of the things I was thinking about as well, and then I'll shut up, but you know, mainstream newspapers and broadcast journalism, they're doing this, they're merging. And so you have newspapers trying to be first. You have, like, the last paper that I worked for, if there was a fire, I had to post on social media, had to drive to the scene, I had to use my phone to videotape the press conference that the fire chief or the police chief was giving. And I was sending it back to the office, and every paragraph of notes that I wrote, I was sending back to the office. And the newspaper was trying to compete with the immediacy of broadcast media. And what we're doing with the journal largely is print. I'm wondering if at some point we'll have to have news in video form, news in blog form, news in other forms that are more consumable for those of us who carry these around, and a lot of us do. That's probably the next progression for this kind of news. And then lastly, I love the concept of nonprofit news as opposed to the kind of news organizations that I'd worked for my entire life. This is a public trust that I feel like is undervalued in the culture right now.
I was also trying to think in anticipation of this conversation about my own reading habits, and what would make me gravitate to spending more time at the journal. One of the things that I find myself engaged by is some kind of curation on the part of the editors about things I should read that I wouldn't otherwise see. And I wonder whether printing links to articles or steering me to articles that I otherwise would miss would be something that people who look at the journal would find welcoming.
Marty, I'll play with that for a minute. And Chris, I probably have mentioned this to you before. I can't quite remember all the discussions we've had over the years, but I think nonprofit journalism, which I share your feelings, Mark, I think it's incredible. And my experience with it, lots of different outlets, not just the journal, is it's very serious, and when I
earnest,
very earnest, very serious. And, when I read the Wall Street Journal every day, the first thing I look at is the little funny story on the bottom half of the front page. There's always a little funny story there. And when I read the Wichita Eagle every day, which I just do on the app, the first thing I go to is the sports section. I get to the other stuff, but I think there's a challenge for nonprofit journalism overall of how to provide something to people who aren't just the people who wake up every morning thinking these earnest things, and
how to provide some variety.
Yeah, and I think without losing the heart of the journal, of course, but and the journal has just done such a beautiful, amazing job. So everything we're talking about now is around the edges and how to enhance it. But to me, it connects, Marty, with your idea, like curated lists or whatnot.
Puzzles, I as you were talking, Ed, I was thinking about. My guess is that there are some really zany people in Kansas who could do a Kansas-related puzzle for every issue, which would have educational value and a deepening of the Kansas identification value. Something which begins to make it more personal. Because I was picking up on your point about seriousness. I think that feels right to me.
It's a different type of bias, and we've got to let Maren and Chris get into this conversation. But it's a different type of bias that exists, and much like the journal has done such a beautiful job of mitigating bias. This feels like it's in that same type of conversation, but it's a different type of bias. But Chris,
yeah, and I don't have the answer for this right now, but I do think this is a structural issue. So I think Ed and I have talked about this before. Like, we used to get like our news in a package of things. So we had like hard news, we had features in a newspaper, we had the sports section, we had comics, we had opinions, or we had a news program that had like all of these different segments. And one of the things that's happened as media has changed is it's all sort of disaggregated and things have specialized. If you want to know about anything going on in the criminal justice system, there's a nonprofit news site called the Marshall Project that's dedicated to that, and it's amazing. And so, but we have like nonprofit news sites, focusing on one thing and focusing on what they do really well. But when you focus on one thing and what you do really well, you tend to like really strengthen your connections with the people who like that one thing, and like your connections with people who aren't into that thing degrade. And so then it becomes impossible to connect people with different needs and values and perspectives together, because they could go to the one thing that truly speaks to them. And so I just think that is a fundamental challenge. And seriousness is just one aspect of that challenge to have to reckon with in this sector right now.
What that makes me think of, Chris, is that the one thing for you or for the journal is Kansas. And my assumption would be that the mission of KLC and the journal is enhanced if my identity as a Kansan is deepened. And the deeper my identity and commitment to this community, the more I'm going to advance the most noble purposes of the journal and KLC.
And I think that's probably one reason why maybe we've spent, like, why KLC decided to invest in the journal, why it's maybe spent more money than it ever thought it would on the journal, and that it wanted something that said that Kansans could take pride in, that said this is a special place to live, that this is a place worth exercising leadership for. And there are places all over the country, like you hear all the time, like someone from New York or like Colorado or wherever, that I wish we had something like the journal. I wish we had something like this in our state. And so I think it's been special for that reason that we've tried to help Kansans see their own specialness and the things, not just our challenges, but also our resources and the thing that makes this a state worth caring about and worth leading on its behalf.
I'd like to add just a couple more things. I've been wondering over time about whether we ought to be doing more obituaries. The New York Times put out a huge volume of some of their best obituaries. And I just think that those are incredible opportunities to talk about people's lives, their challenges, what they've done. And then I appear in a journalism textbook about beat writing. And it made me wonder if we needed a beat structure, and that would give us the kind of depth on stories where if you're reporting on these sort of daily turn of the screw events, it gives you the kind of proximity where you can see patterns forming, and that's how you get to the depth, the deeper reporting that Marty was talking about before. I just wondered if there might be an opportunity to do that with the journal if there are people who want to specialize more. Because as I said before, we have a really strong bullpen, and we may not be leaning in on that independence and that expertise as much as we could be.
So I'm hearing we can get really serious about puzzles potentially as well as a piece of that, which would be really fun. We just have a couple minutes left in this segment, so I'm curious, just closing remarks from each of you. What is this conversation? What are you leaving thinking about, and maybe what's a hope you have for the journal moving forward?
I personally liked catching up with Marty and Ed. And thinking deeply about journalism. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was in the 8th grade. This is something that is very personal, very serious to me. It almost also has a family tie. My sister was the high school journalist of the year in 1971 there in Wichita. That's the reason I went into journalism. And I just see its applications everywhere. And I also see it being devalued in the culture. That's why my participation in the journal is so personally important, as I see journalism being eroded and a lot of our democratic values being challenged. Journalism is more important today maybe than it's ever been in the life of the country. So I just appreciate the privilege of being able to do this with such impressive and learned people.
I want to pick up just on a point that Mark made about beat journalism. In some respects, the journal has a beat, which is leadership. And I wonder whether making that explicit might actually enhance the perspective of the journal, and it would enable you to write about failures as well as successes as a way of illustrating what's going on out there, people who are taking risks in the service of purpose, and both the successes and the struggles that entails. And if you made it explicit, I think that would add some focus.
I think the final thoughts on my end. Number one, I think the juxtaposition of the rise of the journal against the decline of a lot of traditional media, as many of us knew it, I just think is interesting and important to think about. And another reason why I appreciate what Carlota and Mark and Chris as editors have done over the years. I think that the second thing on my mind is, as things get more established, it can be harder to run bold experiments. But I think the journal is an entity that should run bold experiments. I love the nonprofit journalism sector that has emerged in our country, but my hunch is the journal needs to be on the cutting edge of that, not just be in that crowd. And the journal is positioned to probably run experiments in ways some of those other nonprofit journalism entities aren't. And the last thing on my mind, which will just echo something I've already said, it maybe connects to the leadership beat idea. I think we have to popularize the journal. I think if it's a small niche of Kansans who love the in-depth, deep diagnosis of the issues and of leadership stories, that's one thing. But if it can become a vehicle for common information, especially among people who, for example, wouldn't have time to watch this for an hour, or wouldn't have time to read a whole magazine cover to cover because they're working 3 jobs and they're a single mom, but they're interested in their community. I think if we can popularize the journal, we can provide something really important. And even more important than already exists with the journal today, which is already a fabulous contribution to our state.
The challenge is to popularize it without homogenizing it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But honestly, if anybody could figure that out, I think it's Chris Green and Marion Berblinger. I really do.
Yeah, and kudos, Marion, for doing this, but kudos, Chris, for your steering the ship for these decade and a half. It's really amazing. And your own journey is parallel to the journey of the journal. And I think that's a really wonderful story.
Would you like to bring the conversation home with a last remark?
I mean, I just think this is just a really special opportunity, and this has been like, I didn't know how this conversation would go, and I think it's been very interesting. I am concerned like we might owe consulting fees after it. We've like gotten some good advice and some thoughts, but I love that it's the kind of like publication that we can get on the balcony on, and I hope that like this isn't the only reunion of editors, that maybe in another 5, 10, 15, however many years that like the journal and KLC are like growing as a civic institution that is really shaping Kansas and beyond in a way that like we're just known for that. We're known for how we've shaped the civic culture to be this healthier, more productive place. And the journal is an important part of that and fundamental to part of what KLC has accomplished. And I just like look forward to the future and maybe kind of, being the one who's watching from the balcony and not in the driver's seat. And if I do my job well, I think there's a good chance that could happen.
That's great.
Well, thank you all for being on this live stream with us today. It was really special to be in conversation with each of you. And I just want to thank you for the contribution and thought partnership you've brought to the journal and KLC over the years. So thanks for being on today and have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you.
care.
Good to see you all.
Bye-bye. Take care, Mark.
Take care.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our fall journal talk. We are here to discuss a decline in births and out-migration from Kansas that is already starting to bring ripple effects, leaving state and local policymakers with difficult choices. How can the average community member be a part of making progress on this challenge?
I think that you need to engage in the process. You know, we just had local school board elections, talking to your representatives in the state legislature, talking to your school board members, and talking to the administrators, I think is really important.
Yeah, I would say just continue to share all of the wonderful things that are going on in your school district. We are certainly continuing to do sharing the great things that are going on in our school district. Stay engaged, and not just when it's a major issue, but when it's the smallest things, stay engaged, because those smaller things can lead to big things. And so it's important for you to be engaged on the early end of it.
I would say pay attention to what's happening in Topeka. It's worth asking if those priorities are shared by the legislature. You can sometimes see a disparity between the two.
Muy buenas tardes a todos, and thank you so much for having me and for inviting me. It really means a lot to me when la comunidad reaches out and lets me know that my story is important to share.
I was on a pathway to law school because I thought that being an attorney was the only way to help someone, or I wanted to change something, but I just didn't know how or what the pathway to it would be. Part of civic engagement is not just voting, right? It's like participating civically. Tu voto es tu poder, tu voto es tu voz. Your vote is your voice, your vote is your power, but also your voice is your power. If you can't vote, that does not mean you can't participate civically.
We are, some of the people in our community are not able to vote or to have that voice, but it takes those that have that privilege to listen to them and to see what their concerns are. Their stories are also our stories, and if we can fight for their rights or fight for their needs, then we will make our community better for all of us.
It is really important to share whatever I learned, even if it's just a little bit, just to share that with other people. And for me, that's what civic engagement is. You know, not just go and talk to representatives and staff at the Capitol, but to talk to the community and let them know that their voices needs to be heard.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our block party. Salam alaikum, khosh amadeen the function yazmo. I just want to say thank you to everybody.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. My name is Amina Shinwari. I came to Manhattan, Kansas from Afghanistan along with my family in 2017. We are here today as a family and community because my father served as an interpreter with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan alongside Mr. Iran during a very dangerous deployment in Kandahar. I feel lucky to be here because this is an opportunity where I can change my dreams into reality. As I'm speaking in front of you, hundreds of thousands of girls just like me are banned from attending school in Afghanistan. Even female doctors are not allowed to serve in the hospitals. Right after my arrival into the United States, I was enrolled in one of the local schools in Manhattan. It was a very different and difficult experience, but Manhattan teachers made it easier for me to learn. With all those challenges, I received full support from my family and community and made a great academic progress in the last several years. My goal in the future is to be a doctor where I can serve the community with pride and help others. There has been a lot of changes in my short life, but one thing I promise will not change is Afghanistan girls will continue learning and making communities they are in the better for everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
And we are back. So hello, friends. My name is Julian Montes. I am the Creative Services Manager here at the Kansas Leadership Center. I will admit it's a bit odd being on this end of the camera. I'm usually on the other end, but it's so great to be here with y'all. I am sitting here with our chief photographer, Jeff Tuttle. So you've been name dropped already a few times on the front end of the stream, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing real good. How are you?
You know, I think I'm doing pretty all right.
I'm just nervous to be on this side of the camera.
I like the joke you made earlier that I have a face for radio. I don't even know that I have a face for radio myself. but in any case, just to get us started here, what brought you into this career of photojournalism?
Well, just over 40 years ago, my wife bought me a camera for a wedding gift, and I fell in love with photography, and journalism followed that. I went to Kansas State and was surrounded by a great group of photographers, still some of the best in the country, and they influenced me. And my first job took me to Jasper, Indiana, where I worked with the famous John Rumbach, and he taught me how to see and how to shoot pictures as stories and not just individual pictures. So, and then obviously 21 years at the Wichita Eagle to hone those skills in, and here I am at the Journal, and I love it. This is where I want to be. So,
yeah. How long have you been with the Journal?
I'm thinking 12 years. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Laura over there, but I think about 12 years.
Oh, we can find an invoice and find out, I'm sure. So this is really cool for me to sit right here. So I have a lot of friends that are photographers in the Wichita community and a bit broader in the state of Kansas. And the ones that have gone through the Elliott School all name drop Jeff Tuttle. I don't mean to like keep gassing you up here, but I mean, you do have an impact here in Wichita and with other photographers, communicators, and I mean, certainly an impact with me. And so I just want to say again, this is a really cool moment.
Those are my kids. So that goes back a long way. So when you get to be 63, you have a lot of photo kids, I call them. So very good people, very good folks.
Yeah. Well, do you mind my asking, what was your first camera? Do you remember?
Well, Laura, my wife gave me a Canon AE1.
Okay.
And one lens. So that was in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
I have an AE1 on my desk at home right now.
Okay.
I have two. One that doesn't work and one that I bring out occasionally.
Right.
Yeah. What was the transition like from like film, analog photography to now digital space that we're in?
So the first digital cameras were not very good. They weren't as good as film, but they're now as good or better. But back in the day, they weren't. But they provided us at the newspaper to be able to turn pictures from a ball game or a news event around from a laptop computer instead of running back to the darkroom, processing film, printing out and as fast as we could. So it changed everything. Everything. We were able to do things a lot faster.
Yeah. What do you have a preference? So I ask photographers this all the time. Do you have a preference between digital or analog?
I still have analog cameras, but I work with digital. I mean, I have to. Chris Green would not approve me doing film because that's just a whole different ball game.
So speaking of just other photos that you've taken, we do have a set of 10 photos that you've sent us. Would love to get those up on the screen now and just, and walk through them a little bit. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what's going on here.
So we at the Journal we talk about stories before we go out and shoot, and I recommended that maybe we should go shoot the Flint Hills Rodeo, and this is a photograph from the parade from the rodeo, and And so this whole scene is at the corner in Cottonwood Falls. And as the parade people go by, the horses and everything, they get blasted with water. And it was just real cute. I love the old Coca-Cola cooler and the old light above it. And it was just a really good weekend. I probably liked the weekend more than the picture, I think, because it's just a really neat event.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think one of my favorite things about being a photographer and videographer sometimes isn't even really just doing the camera work, but being in really different places and experiencing, literally through a different lens, but experiencing moments like these.
Yeah, and you tend to maybe like a picture more because of the experience, and maybe it's, I have to have other eyes look at it and say, I know you had a good time, but we're not going to use this. So, so you do get attached emotionally to the pictures because of the event you're shooting.
I will admit, I do run some of my albums that I submit here for work through my wife to get a gut check.
Yeah, that's a real smart thing to do. I know Laura is a really good photo editor too. So
it all works out. You just told me what this was about, but what was that day like for you, or in context of
how
that happened?
Cottonwood Falls is a tiny little town. What's in Strong City, I guess. I'm sorry, it's in Strong City, but we were in both towns because they're so close. But it was rainy, and Laura and I have a little bitty camper that we took up and parked in somebody's backyard and spent a couple days up there and photographed the whole event. So from beginning to end, from the parade to the actual rodeo, and then I always try to look at things on the outside, not just people getting thrown off horses and things, and so trying to tell the whole story. And so it was just a really neat weekend. And, right down to I think the last thing I photographed was the dance, the big Saturday night dance. So it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to do it again.
Did you get any steps in for that dance?
Did I what?
Do you get a dance in during that?
No, I'm not a dancer. I'm not a dancer.
Fair enough. Well, we'll move to the next photo here.
Yeah. So same event. I would never do this. It is so much fun to shoot. Kind of busy backgrounds, but these guys are and gals are absolutely, in my opinion, nutty for getting on those wild horses and bulls and things. But just trying to look for the impact picture. That's what I was taught at Kansas State. Is we always tried to capture the picture, not just a picture, but try to get the picture. That's still with me today. Now, I was taught later that 5 or 6 pictures together with the picture makes a pretty nice magazine spread. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah. So technically speaking, this is phenomenal. For anyone who is uninitiated to the rodeo, this is very fast.
Yeah.
And this is so crisp from this perspective. Like, I just really love this photo too, alone for the story, but the technical work here is pretty great. I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you.
It's professional.
Shot a lot of sports in my career, so this is like riding a bicycle, I guess. I don't know. I've always had. I was a terrible athlete, or not terrible. I was on teams, but not a very good athlete. But I've somehow became a sports photographer for a long time, and so I still get to go back and play and do a little bit of that now. I don't do any of that, professionally now, but Chris allows me to every once in a while go shoot moving things, and that's fun.
Yeah. What all the different types of photography have you done in your career?
Well, mostly, I would say my first job was shooting picture stories and sports. That's what I did in Jasper, and at the Eagle I did everything, but a lot of sporting events, football and basketball, and I've more than I want to know. a lot of games. But other things too. We had to be pretty well rounded over there, and I loved it. It was the best job in the world.
Well, we'll get back to the photos here in a second, but I'm really curious then. What's probably the most unique shooting situation you've been in, or the most memorable?
I get asked that a lot, and I don't have that picture. People say, well, what is your favorite photo you've ever shot? And I've been lucky to get some really good ones, but my favorite is my son, and he's with my Labrador, and they're at the park, and he's getting a drink of water, and the Labrador is getting a drink of water, and those are my favorite picture, and so that's one of the only pictures of mine that hangs in the house.
Oh,
so I have other photographers' pictures, but not mine.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Probably in a very similar vein, and I wish that my wife had Facebook to be able to see this, but I'll show her later some other way. But my favorite photo is actually of my wife and our dog.
Yeah.
Just out at Bartlett Arboretum, and
yeah,
not anything technical, not anything
Nope.
special, but special to us.
It is real special, and Zach's a photographer too. That's my son. So,
Oh wow.
He's matter of fact, the last issue he did a photo shoot for us. So it's kind of neat to get him involved, and he lives in Denver, and we're real proud of him.
You should be.
Yeah.
We'll go to that next photo then.
Hmm.
Oh, so that's a special one.
Yeah, that made a cover. I'm Chris Green will always tell you I love live covers, and I don't get them very often, but when I do, I do. So there you go, Chris Green. This was one of the first things I shot this year. This was in Manhattan, refugees, and I didn't speak their language. They didn't speak mine. We did a lot of communication with our eyes and smiles and things like that. A couple frowns from a couple people that probably didn't trust me, so it took a minute to get in, but I was with these, we spent a dinner with them and met them and went to work with them and went to school with them. And they're all adapting to living in Kansas after coming over. So it was AJ was a reporter, and it was a really neat thing to photograph and to hear their stories and the sad part of their stories, but the hope too.
Yeah, one thing I think a lot about whenever I'm dropping into a location is kind of in a way, like, do people trust me? Like, do I look like a trustworthy person with a camera? And does that, I guess from your perspective, I'm curious, like, how much does trust play into, it's probably some of the more editorial stuff that you do, but the work that you do?
Yeah, I guess I have a gift for gab and a gift for getting people to trust me and to break the ice, and I've said this to Chris before, it's a lot easier to do that with the Journal than it was, say, with the Wichita Eagle, because the biases and everything that were with the Eagle, they didn't trust. But I think our publication has made people, made it easier for me to get into situations. And, I just try to be honest. I mean, you just have to be honest with people and try to get their trust. And whether, the last issue we're shooting, I'm in a small town and the school has closed and they're not going to reopen it. And I want to get inside to make pictures, but I have to convince the old principal to let me in. And, I did, and I shoot and I show him the picture of what I'm getting and to make him, trust me. And he did. And we used the pictures, and there was no harm.
I don't remember if this was this year or late last year, but didn't you get into like First Congregation Church allegedly?
Yeah, I did. I walked in with the construction crew, but again, I asked permission. I did. So maybe not from the owner, but he wasn't there, or she. I don't know who it is.
The right person said yes.
Yes, they did.
All right, let's check out that next photo.
Yeah, this is a really neat story. This is a relative of Buffalo Bill Cody, right? Is that? Yeah, he's Mr. Gray. This is in Geneseo, Kansas, and this is a story on a transmission line that was going to be going through there, and I got to go up and meet this guy, and we got in his old pickup, and it was disgustingly dirty and awesome, and he went out, and we do a lot of ag stories, and I'm always I like to go out in our state and see these people, and even his cow, he's such a good guy. His cows even trusted. They went right up to him, and it was just a really good day. I wish you could see his face, because he looks like Bill Cody. I mean, he really does. So it's a really neat, beautiful. He took me and showed me the old trails and on his property, and where the Indians, the Native Americans had come through, and it's just really cool.
Whenever you do things like this that are maybe a bit more rural, and if this isn't rural, forgive my ignorance, but how do you get out there? What do you pack with you? How do you get out there?
I have a truck, and I mean, that's why I drive the truck, I think, is so I can get to places. I used to have an old Bronco that would kind of did the same thing, but yeah, just making sure that in my truck I have things that in case I do get in trouble, and yeah, I don't know, just go. I like being outside, boots and coats and whatever it takes. So
Fair enough.
yeah,
I'd always consider getting like a Sprinter van kind of
Yeah.
deal and building that out. I know my wife would love if we were able to just go out into the road and I go do photography, and we lived in a little Sprinter van.
Yeah, so I have slept in that truck a few times for Chris Green, and when there's no hotels out in Western Kansas, or you're having to get up at 5 to go shoot something anyway, why not be there? And so I try not to do that. We bought this little camper that hopefully that'll change that a little bit, because sleeping in the back of the truck is really not all that comfortable.
I was gonna say that I can't. I know it's the bed of the truck, but it's not that.
No, it's the back seat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, even worse.
Well,
Bed of the truck would be easier.
Fair enough. Let's get to the next photo.
So we don't travel outside of Kansas too often, but I was lucky enough to get this assignment to go to Tulsa and photograph Black Wall Street, and I was blown away by this neighborhood and the people that come in to visit this neighborhood, and to see what it was. Then it was, burned and destroyed, and what it is now, it's pretty amazing. And so this gentleman was, he came in on a motorcycle, and he was visiting from Atlanta, I think. And I had these pictures printed, and I just had him hold them, and right on the main street, and there's so much to shoot there. But this kind of came out as the strongest picture. It is the before and the after of a horrible situation.
Whenever you're dealing with or taking photographs about stories like these, I find myself when I'm in stories that are tougher to wrestle with, like whether the history is like just difficult. How do you stay focused in really deep stories like these?
Yeah. So my time in Jasper, Indiana, John Rumbach, who was my photo editor and editor of the paper, owned the paper, taught me to write things down before you go out on a shoot, and try to maybe make it so that you have a little bit of a blueprint. And then if you follow the blueprint and think about things before you go, when you get there, you follow that blueprint, but you seldom use it. So I knew going in it, I knew I wanted to do this picture. I didn't know what I was going to do with this picture. So I just knew to go have these prints made, and I would use them somehow. And so I pre-plan a lot. I just kind of think things out. I usually try to read the story, hopefully, before I go, which makes a huge difference. And try to photograph the people that are in the story.
Yeah, 'cause this is striking to me, and I really appreciate this photo. I appreciate all your photos, but
thank you.
This one's hitting me particularly differently today. Let's move to the next one.
Yay, wine. So we Stan Finger, a reporter, Stan Finger, and I, who I've worked with for 100 years, it seems like, we did a story on Kansas wine, and And this was grape stomping day, the last day. I think I was already past deadline, but I was trying to get Chris to let me go ahead and go out and do this. It was amazing. It's an ag story again, with a little bit of flavor to it. We went to Manhattan to a really nice place up there that is just lovely. And then this was shot out at Grace Hill in out by Whitewater.
Did you try any of the wines
Yes.
that they're stomping?
But,
I guess I don't know much about how wine is made.
yeah, it's amazing, and it all starts with grapes right there, but it is a really neat process, and we met some really nice people, and it made it really easy for us to make these pictures to for them to open up and let us come out and do that.
Well, a tip of the glass to that. Let's get to the next photo.
Okay, this is in the latest issue. This was a story that we did on a gentleman that made a flag for blind people, a Braille flag, and this is a grandfather and his granddaughter, she's partially blind, and he's getting to see the Braille flag for the first time, and it's just touching. It's a moment. I like his military tattoo and everything that goes along with it, and it's a pretty subtle picture, but it shows everything. It shows the flag, it shows a little of emotion, and certainly the love there between those two.
Yeah, I had never really considered, again, having full sight, that someone who's blind has never really felt the flag, or
right. And it's they're in schools, and they're it's a pretty neat deal. It really is. It gives people a chance to participate in something that they haven't been able to participate in.
Well, I think we have time for just one more photo, and then
Okay.
we'll close.
Jamie Funk. This is again, I think Chris Green told me last year we need more ag pictures, and I think I've overdone ag pictures, but this is a really neat story we did. I got to meet a lot of farmers, and he's checking his wheat crop. It was a rough year, and so he's doing things the right way with his protecting his soil and not overgrowing things year after year after year. And so that was kind of what the story was about, is how these farmers are practicing new things in old ways, or old ways, however you ever say that. But yeah, it's
I get what you're
new
saying,
farming,
yeah.
and I think it's working. I think it's gonna, if we can get the rest of the farmers to do it, I think it'll help protect a lot of our ag in the state.
Yeah, I just this past week I went to Victoria, Kansas, where I went to visit my in-laws. I knew they were farmers, but I'd never seen the farm before. And so I saw the wheat this past week, or at least the little budlings. But
Yeah.
it was really interesting. And what this is making me think about is just all the stories that exist in Western Kansas, particularly with like the what was it, the Olga German folks that came through first, and particularly with my in-laws, just how deeply connected they are to the hometown.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of that.
It's it kind of irks me when people say Western Kansas is ugly, because it's not. If you get off I-70, you're not only going to see beauty, you're going to meet some really neat people and that have been there for generations. And they battle the droughts, they get flooded, they snowstorms, everything, but they're true Kansans, and they're fighters. I mean, they love it out there, and they should put you to work a little bit on that farm, maybe. Huh? You've not seen wheat before.
Well, I grew up in Nebraska a little bit, so I saw corn.
Oh, okay.
I helped lay
Same
irrigation
thing.
and did some detasseling. Well, so yeah, you mentioned Western Kansas. We've been talking about Kansas as a whole, and I think we've said kind of internally that, like, I don't think there's been another photographer in Kansas that has captured as much of Kansas as Jeff Tuttle had.
Ooh, I don't know about that. I've got some really good friends that are still doing it. It's really a shame the industry has gone in a direction that's south. Some of my classmates are retired because they're at that age, or the industry ran out on them. And I'm very, very lucky that the Journal has kind of extended my career, and I get to do what I love to do, and that's photojournalism.
So in that vein, last question here as we close. We've got about 3 minutes, so
Okay.
take your time with it.
Okay.
What gets you most excited about capturing photos all over Kansas?
I think what I like is being able to plan a story, contact the people, get them to trust me, and then the process of all that, the drive out. I name a town in this state. I bet I've been there. And if I haven't been there, Chris Green usually gets a text and said, "Look where I'm at now. I've never been here." So I like it all. I love to travel. I love to see my state. I shoot a lot of things as I'm traveling, and so it's not a vacation, but I get to get out of the city and see my state that I love dearly.
Well, just to continue to speak on your impact, the photos in the journal that you've taken. So I'm a transplant here. I bumped around from Texas, Tennessee, and Nebraska, and I like those places. They looked beautiful to me at the time, but every time I go back and read the journal and look through the photos there, I just gain a much deeper appreciation for Kansas.
Yeah.
And all the things that it is, and a lot of that is through. I mean, the writers are great. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is through your photography.
I appreciate that.
And like I just wouldn't. I don't think I'd love Kansas as much if it wasn't for your work. And so to that, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Photographer to photographer here.
Yeah.
I hope that I get to do the kind of storytelling that you've done. And
let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah. So in that vein, we're going to transition here to another break, and then we'll have, I believe, Chris and Marin back up in these seats. So it's been a joy, friends. But I'll go ahead and send it off. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for tuning in for Giving News Day with us here at the Journal. We hope you've enjoyed these really special conversations. It was a sweet walk down memory lane, and it just made me feel like really connected and inspired by the work of all the people that make the Journal possible. So I'm feeling very grateful today, and just thank you for tuning in.
Yes, and it's been a lot of fun to do this. Thank you for reading, for listening, for watching throughout the year, for being sources, for sending us great story ideas, and please continue being a part of the Journal. And if you have a chance to, if you can support us during our end of the year campaign, we'd be most grateful. So until next time, that's it.